Good afternoon. The League of Women Voter of Greater Tucson welcomes you to a discussion on Proposition 414. We will be voting on this in March, so it's important to hear all about 414 and have any questions we might have answered. I'm Barbara Becker, and I will be your moderator for today. With me is Jenny Simatachi and Sue DeArmond. They will be sorting your questions so that the questions are directly relevant to the issues and are not repetitive. Councilmember Nikki Lee, Lieutenant, now I'm going to get frustrated, Jason Bratterhoff, and City Manager Tim Tamur will be speaking today. But before we introduce them formally, I'd like to review a few ground rules. Let us show respect for one another at all times so there are no public comments or clapping or booing. Please take a moment to turn off your cell phones and make sure they're silenced for the duration. And please, no videotaping or recording of this session. We're live streaming on Facebook, and this forum will be available to view on our YouTube site. So let me begin by introducing our speakers. Tim Tamur was appointed by the Mayor and City Council last March and took on the position in July. He had previously served as Deputy City Manager, and before that, Assistant City Manager, and before that, Director of Tucson Water from 2016 to 2021. He's a licensed professional civil engineer and has served on a variety of boards and steering committees throughout the state. Thank you for discussing Proposition 414 with us this afternoon. He's joined by Nikki Lee, who is in her second term in Ward 4, and her focus in Ward 4 has been on core services. And we're also joined by Jason Bratterhoff. Oh, good. He's a lieutenant in the Tucson Police Department on the east side. So now let us begin.
Okay. You ready to start?
Perfect. I guess you want me to go ahead and get started, Barbara? Okay, perfect. I am just going to frame up the conversation briefly and then pass it over to our wonderful city manager to fill in a lot of details about 414. But a question that we often get is why 414 and why now? And so I wanted to just take a moment to explain what brought us to the point that we're at today. There's kind of three factors I talk about why we're going to the public to ask if the folks in the community want to invest in 414. The state made some changes to the flat tax. They implemented a flat tax several years ago that went into effect, as well as some corporate tax changes that are resulting in a decrease in state shared revenue coming to the city of Tucson, as well as cities and towns across the state. So we're looking at tens of millions of dollars of less funding coming into the state, and we still have to pay for our police officers and pay for all the services that folks need in our community. The second factor in my mind is that the cost of doing business continues to increase. Year after year, Mayor and Council prioritize raising wages for our employees so that we can remain competitive and continue to deliver services, because we need all of the amazing people in our organization to be out there delivering the services. And equipment is getting more expensive and everything is getting more expensive. So the cost of doing business is increasing and the demand for our services are increasing. So year after year, when we see our Tucson firefighters reports, they are answering more calls for service, with 80% of them being medical in nature, and so our system is really getting strained, and we have a lot of folks who are eligible to retire, and we have a lot of challenges that are kind of coming to a head right now. And the way that it works is our department directors will go to our city manager and say, city manager, this is what I need to be successful and do my job. And then the city manager will come to mayor and council and say, this is what we need to do the job. And if the money is not there in the budget, I have to go to my bosses, which are you all, the public, and say, hey, this is what we need in order for our folks to be able to do their job. So this is really, to me, a function of us going out to our bosses and saying, hey, do you all want us to prioritize improvements in these areas? So that is kind of how, in my mind, we got to where we're at, but I will hand it over to the city manager to really talk more about what 414 is, and we'll go from there, I guess.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Lee. So again, I'm Tim Tom, City Manager, and the Safe and Vibrant City Prop 414 that's before voters is really a question for voters of whether you would like to enact upon yourselves an additional half-cent sales tax for a 10-year period in order to invest in 5 strategic areas. These 5 areas were selected based on input from the community in a variety of ways. Those come in the form of interactions with the community that we have on a regular basis. They come from the budget town halls that we've had in past years. They do come from the department directors that work and provide these services about what is the level of service we're providing with our current resources, and what do we believe the level of service that Tucsonans would like to see in these areas. And there's a mismatch there. The resources that we have don't allow us to expand and or maintain service in these areas at our current or even an improved service level. And as the council member mentioned, our resources coming back to us from the state, which are actually, come from Tucson up to Phoenix, but they only a portion comes back to Tucson, have been significantly reduced. In fact, in a recent couple news articles, there's a discussion just now starting in Phoenix about a very similar half-cent what we call transaction privilege tax or sales tax to deal with the various same issues. So we're not alone in that impact from the state revenue, and we're certainly not alone in looking to our citizens for asking that question. In the case of Phoenix, it's a mayor and council decision of whether to enact it. Here in Tucson, it's the voters. The voters get to decide. So those 5 areas include an expansion of our emergency response capabilities. That includes both police and fire, and you can, if you can't pick it up on the microphone, there's a siren outside right now. The needs have continued to grow. The number of calls continue to grow, but the ability to provide those services has not. We have not expanded our firefighter number in a number of years. In fact, it's been reduced. We have not been able to expand our number of police officers. But what we have been able to do is what we call put the right work in the right hands and engage other ways to get the work done. And in the case of police, our community service officers are the most visible part of that. So not only have we engaged a different way to provide the services in our CSOs, which now when you see like a crime or an accident scene, you might, instead of seeing 2 police cruisers and police officers, you might see some Ford Mavericks with folks in a little bit different uniform. Those are CSOs, and they're a way for us to provide that service more economically, but also many of them go on to become police officers if they so choose. But right now they also have a career path to do work for the community without having to become a police officer if they so choose. So there's certainly an expansion of personnel. There's also an expansion of the capital needs of fire, police, and other parts of our system. So the ambulances we need, the police car interceptors we need, all the apparatus they need, but also their personal protective gear, the turnouts the firefighters wear, all the things that keep our police officers safe. So that's another area of investment, including an additional fire station that would be in the north side of town, and an additional police and fire facility in the southeast part of town. Those would be built with these revenues. There's an investment in technology. A lot of people point to one part of that, and I'll come to that in just a moment. But it's technology across the board. It's our body-worn camera footage and the transparency and accountability that comes with that. It's our ability to make that data readily accessible to the public. It's what we call our CAD and or radio systems, where that's how calls come in from the public to our 911 center or our 311 center, and then the services that are needed are dispatched through those systems. They need an upgrade, and they need to be maintained over time. So that's part of that technology. And then a final part of the technology piece is our air support units for TPD, and you'll hear people saying we have a $16 million airplane in there. That's not true. There's a $16 million line item. One of the many things in that line item is an airplane. And really what it is we have 3 helicopters right now, 2 from 2006. Those are the new ones. 1 from 1999. And what we want to do is replace all of those units and one of them would be replaced with a fixed-wing aircraft or airplane. By doing so, not only do we get our air support unit modernized and replaced, as is long overdue, but when that airplane allows us to expand our capabilities, because the helicopters do one or two things very, very well. The airplane does a number of things very, very well. And it can be in the air 8 to 10 hours instead of 1 to 2 hours. So it's a replacement, but also a modernization that occurs. So pivoting from our first responders, we have a number of other investments that will make the community more vibrant, more resilient, and decrease the need in Tucson for those first responder responses in the future. How does that happen? That happens by getting people securely and affordably housed. Housing security is number one or number two, depending on how you want to rank it, versus fentanyl and opioids. But our two biggest crises right now in Tucson are housing security and the fentanyl opioid crisis. These investments under neighborhood and community resilience and affordable housing and shelter address those root causes of a lot of concerns that are affecting us now, to address them now, and prevent them in the future. So it includes things like early childhood education, workforce development, gap financing to get more housing units built in Tucson. It includes investments in our community-based violence interruption, where we have piloted some activities to reduce violent gun crime in Tucson. We want to continue and expand those. And the biggest success story we've had is called our VIVA program, Violence Interruption and Violation Action. We were one of 5 cities to pilot this, where it begins with a police investigation and an intervention, and you disrupt a crime network that's supporting gun crime in a location. That's great, and we've known about that for years, but when you do that, but you don't do something on the back end of that to stabilize that location and make it more resilient and owned and occupied by the neighborhoods, that crime will just come back in time. So we've been on the pioneering end of a lot of these things, our Housing First program, a number of others, and this allows us to not just maintain but expand those services. When you couple that with the funding, not just threat, the funding reduction from the state, and even after this was called by the council, the funding threat from the federal government, where overnight $380 million of our federal funds were turned off. They've now been turned back on, but it's only a matter of time before we know that some of that funding will be withdrawn. This is where the best thing we can do is count on Tucsonans to invest in Tucson. And so that's why the Prop 414 is being put before the voters to ask the question about investing in these 5 areas through that 10-year half-cent sales tax. What I'll add to it before we kind of move on and maybe even go to some of your questions is that how do people know that myself and or the mayor and council will do what the voters approve? How will you have the assurity that this is what we would do with those dollars? 2 main things. One, we live up to our promises right now. Voters have approved Proposition 409, Proposition 101, Proposition 407, and Proposition 411 to do a variety of investments in Tucson. And we have done exactly what we said. The voters approved Prop 411 to pave or improve every neighborhood street in Tucson. We're 25% complete. Half the time, or a quarter of the time, I guess, when you turn down a road in Tucson, you're pleasantly surprised that it's actually in decent shape instead of what it was. And we've got a long way to go. That was approved in 2022, and we're already a quarter of the way completing that. Prop 101, I was just at New Station 8, Fire Station 8 yesterday, and that's a brand new station. We're turning the old Station 8 into a low barrier congregate shelter for Tucson's most vulnerable. So all of these are examples of how Tucson delivers. So you'll know that Tucson will do what it says it will do. But that's not enough. Our track record, while it speaks for itself, is not enough. So there's also an independent accountability tax commission that will be appointed and oversee all of this activity under Prop 414 if approved. We've had those similar citizen-led committees on our existing bond and sales tax programs. They've been an integral part of making sure we do what we say we're going to do, and that the public can have confidence that that's the case. So this will be that same level of oversight by the citizens, but it'll have an additional element to it because there's so much complexity to this. There's 5 different areas that all interact and interrelate, is that mayor and council will adopt the spending plan on an annual basis. So we do an annual budget for most of our spending already, but on these propositions, we have like a 8-year program or a 10-year program, and that's decided, and we just go and do our business. Here, we will be reporting back at least annually to the public, more frequently than that through that commission, but also the mayor and council will be that final check and balance on us to make sure we're not digressing from the promise to the voter. So that's in a nutshell, a pretty big nutshell with lots of little places for nuts to hide like us, but it's really these 5 focus areas. They're all interrelated, and investment in all those areas is necessary to accomplish these goals. And then there's that oversight and confidence that folks can have that we'll do exactly what we said we'll do. Would you like to add anything?
Sure. I can offer some input on the Community Service Officer Program as an example. Sorry, to kind of hinge on what Mr. Tamir mentioned, referencing community service officers and putting the right work in the right places. I became a police officer in 2004, been with the department for over 21 years now. When we started in 2004, we had about 1,200 officers, and we're down to roughly about 750. I give Tucson a lot of credit in that we did not have a very robust CSO program when I first came on. And what we have now been forced to do as a result of being a little more adaptable is use those CSOs as a force multiplier for calls that don't require police officers. And what that does is it keeps our police officers moving to the priority emergency calls and sending our CSOs to the low priority calls like the traffic accidents, the burglaries, the things where there aren't suspects in custody, to kind of get a faster community or customer service response to you all. We have a ton of CSOs now. What this proposition would do would hire more of them. As the city manager mentioned, a lot of them will move on to the police officer recruit program, which is what we're seeing now, which is fantastic because it's a great way to bridge the gap between the 18 and 21-year-olds. You have to be 21 to apply as a police officer recruit, and it gives them a career path and also helps alleviate some of our recruiting struggles. From a business standpoint, the CSOs are also a whole heck of a lot cheaper. Sorry, pardon my language. They're a heck of a lot cheaper than a police officer. And in that program, we also have a PSI program, which is essentially a CSO detective. They do everything that a detective would do without requiring arrest powers or the carrying of a firearm. And again, the CSOs are a force multiplier in our patrol divisions that you would most likely see, and then our PSIs are a force multiplier in our criminal investigations divisions. What that means in the criminal investigations area is a lot more cases can get worked. Whereas in the past, in a previous job I had, I was a detective supervisor. I only have, a certain amount of detectives and a certain amount of cases coming in. They all can't get worked. And you're sitting there making these decisions on Monday morning to deciding which ones live and which ones die and which ones get assigned and which ones don't. Our PSI program allows us to assign a lot more of those cases and again provide a better service with less people to the city of Tucson. Reference Viva if you have questions about Viva. I'm the Viva lieutenant for our East Side program, which is at 22nd and Prudence. Our 22nd and Prudence project has gone extremely well. We're looking to transition that into a maintenance phase because our crime has dropped dramatically in that area, and we're looking to move that project into other areas of the East Side Patrol Division in the future. And reference the crime intervention and interruption that the city manager and Councilmember Lee referenced. That's currently in a test phase, but what this would do would bring that more full mainstream. I'll give you an example of what we saw just this past week, and I'll speak in generalities, not to give specific case examples. But we have, in this circumstance, a group of juveniles who are all related, under the age of 18, 3 to 4 of them. One of them is a gun offender. The rest of them have been found with guns in various circumstances, but haven't quite committed extremely serious crimes as of yet. What that program has allowed us to do is refer that family and those kids, their kids carrying guns, to our crime interruption intervention folks to start offering them services to try and hopefully get them on the track we need them to go on that's completely unrelated from the police department, just as an example.
We're ready for your question.
Okay, well, we've got some. So
right.
Here we go. What happens to existing services in these areas if the Proposition 414 does not pass?
Do you want me to take a stab at that, Tim, and then you fill in?
Sure.
I asked the same question of the city manager, and he reminded us that we have a job to do, we have core services to deliver, and we will continue to deliver those services. This would allow us, this proposition, if approved, would allow us to scale and do things faster and better and get more people from the street into housing, should the resources be there. We would be limping along with some of our fleet and other aspects of what are really critical resources for especially our public safety personnel, but we're committed to continuing to deliver the best possible service that we can to the city of Tucson residents and businesses if 414 does not pass. But city manager, anything else?
What I would add to it is the level of service would stay the same for a bit, and then it would likely degrade over time. So right now, if you're a small business owner and you're a little bit frustrated about the loitering that occurs and vandalism that occurs, and we know that that doesn't get the top priority. We're out there with violent gun crime. We're out there with human trafficking. And so when that prioritization occurs, that's what gets maybe the slowest response. That will continue, quite frankly, and there's no resources we have to apply to try to bring those crimes, those incidents, those impacts to small businesses or homeowners more resource than what we have now without this. So if this doesn't pass, the things that are the way they are in Tucson will stay that way. And gradually, our resources will continue to be consumed. And as prices increase and other factors, they would drive a gradual degradation of service.
Can I also add to that, just from the fire department standpoint? In talking to the chief, I understand that about 60% of our current firefighters are eligible to retire next year. And that's a scary number. Hopefully they don't all retire on us. Hopefully we've created a good culture and environment for them to stay. But in talking to the fire chief, there may be things we have to consider not responding to. Man down calls, he said there are about 9,000 of those a year that our firefighters are responding to. So for example, they just see someone laying on a sidewalk somewhere, no one knows what the situation is with that person. Because of staffing and burnout, we may have to make a decision to not respond to those types of calls, which could mean life or death for some individuals, depending on their situation. So to the city manager's point, we're thinking about what may have to come off the list, given the resources and staffing levels if we can't do this. But we are overhiring for firefighters in anticipation of a potential wave of retirement, but that's just the reality of what we're working with right now.
Okay. With the Chamber of Commerce against this proposition, do you think it might fail?
I can
Go for it.
I don't think it'll fail. I think it'll pass for a couple reasons. One, this question is not for the Chamber of Commerce, it's not for the mayor and council, it's not for me. This is for Tucsonans and Tucson voters. And I think Tucson voters have expressed in a variety of forums that these are issues that they want better service and a safer Tucson. So I think they recognize that this is a path to do that. I also recognize that the business community is not a monolith. And even some of the business community has taken a position, some have taken no position because they understand there's a tension between the benefits and the impacts of it. And even those votes from those business community organizations that have taken a position have not been unanimous. So those boards of directors are not united either. So when you look through a lens of a single person or entity and their opinion, you got to balance that against that's not even a unified opinion sometimes, but also that's not always speaking for real folks, right? Real folks are going to decide this. And when you look at the folks that have verbally and visually come out in support of it, I think you see a pretty broad cross-section of Tucson right there.
I will just add that we have a very intelligent electorate. We've seen that time and time again with how folks decide to vote on different issues. And I definitely trust that the voters are going to make the right decision here. So I think they've heard the cases on all sides of it, and I'm eager to see what they and you all decide to do.
Right, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I have a question that probably the lieutenant will want to answer. What does the Tucson Police Department use the air support resources to do in the community? What are the helicopters and planes used to provide in public safety?
Sure, great question. So full disclosure, I've been a lieutenant for a month. So Godspeed, please be gentle. Prior to this, I was a SWAT supervisor for a really long time. As a SWAT supervisor, we used the airplane of the Sheriff's Department and the helicopter quite a bit. The helicopter that we have is very well suited for patrol type of work. It can get very low if needed, and it can orbit on scenes very close to kind of pin people down. So if someone were running from the police, if someone was in your backyard or God forbid on your roof, etc., those are the things that the helicopter does very well at. What the plane does well at is that you can't generally hear it, and it can orbit for long periods of time. So when we use the Sheriff's Department plane, that plane can be up for anywhere from 6 hours plus. When we start following vehicles or working some of these violent crime type of cases and we're doing long-term surveillances of these vehicles, they don't know they're being followed. They don't flee from the police as a result, and it minimizes erratic driving behavior or vehicle pursuits. From a patrol standpoint, the beauty of having a plane is that it can also do a lot of what the helicopter does to a certain extent. The benefit of it in that it's generally up a lot longer. The helicopter flight times currently are right about 45 minutes to 1 hour at a time. They're very limited. So on any given night, our helicopters are only up about 3 to 4 hours a shift, and they're currently generally only working at nights. So it's really a multifaceted platform between the plane and the helicopters that give us a whole lot better options for service. Within the line item for that funding, it includes a new engine to then salvage kind of one of the older helicopters and get some more life out of that, in addition to a new helicopter to replace the oldest one.
If I could add just one thing to that. That was a great overview of that. And so he mentioned that we do borrow the Pima County Sheriff's plane. So one of the questions is, isn't that sufficient? And I will tell you, the first time Chief walked into my office, said, I want a plane. I said, no. And then he said, well, hear me out. And, you know, it took him 2 tries in a white paper written by cops. And if you've ever read a white paper written by cops, it's long. But the business case is pretty solid for the plane. Now, the reason TPD replacing one of its helicopters with the plane would do 2 things. One is it replaces an old unit that needs to be replaced, but with a superior unit. And the sheriff's plane, when we have access to it, is very helpful, but we don't have access to it a lot. And if it gets to be retasked by the sheriff for some high priority incident in the county, we lose it like that. And that we can't really complain about that because that's the sheriff's asset. And with a 250 square mile city, there is definitely enough demand in this community for 2 planes, and they also could then provide relief to each other. So this is not at all to imply that the sheriff hasn't been very supportive and very generous with that plane, because they have. The need has just outstripped that at this point.
Can I add a couple sprinkles on top of the ice cream here? So you all both said similar things to what I wrote down, but the technology exists in our community right now. The sheriff's department is using a similar capability. The technology exists, so it's not necessarily new. To the city manager's point, we do have a 250 square mile city, and I don't know how long it takes you all to get across town, but it's a few minutes to get from one side of town to the other. So this capability is really, really important. This capability enables us to tackle the problems that we have heard from the community. For example, we talk about street racing. We talk about, I represent Ward 4, which is a huge geographic. It's about 40% of the geographic area of Tucson. So we have a lot of rural aspects of Ward 4. So when they're looking for a person, they have that view from the sky to be able to do that. So this enables TPD to solve some of the challenges, but it's not just TPD. Our fire chief has talked about how technology can work for his department with respect to looking for wildfire and heat spots. And that is something that will just enhance public safety across the board. So it's really a broad use for us here in the community. And another piece that I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about is there have been some concerns that have come up that I think are very healthy about what are you all doing with this technology. And I think my personal opinion is that as very healthy distrust of government is really important. I think that we need to understand what technology is being used, how it's being used, what data is being collected with that technology, how is that data being stored, and when is it destroyed after retention, and how is that data being secured from a cybersecurity standpoint. Those are all really important questions that are being brought up. I've already started to work with the city attorney and our chief information officer and our police chief on doing just that, looking at the policies that we have in place, seeing where the gaps are in terms of policies that we need to have that are public facing for any technology that we're using that the public may interact with. I have kids, and so I never know that they need a poster board until we're on the way to school. So the other day I had to drive and I found out we needed a poster board, so I had to pull over, go in the store, and there were cameras everywhere in the store. And I just thought to myself, I never know what they're doing with all this information, but I can opt out of going to that store if I want to, if I don't want that type of technology watching me. But citizens can't opt out, right? You all are on the roads, the sidewalks. So to me, this is my personal tangent, being an IT and cybersecurity person. It's important to me so that we build trust with the community, that you all understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're protecting that data until it is destroyed. So I am done with my tangent on that one. Thank you, Barbara.
You're so welcome. Some people have been critical of the percent allocated for housing services versus law enforcement investment. What is your perspective on how that balance was established? Housing is a major issue in the community. Should we be investing more in that area?
So I'll start. I'm sure Councilmember Lee will weigh in as well. So there's not enough investment in any of these 5 parts of the pie. So that's a place to start from, because we can't say that any of these are enough, quote unquote. Now, how did we end up with this balance? It is informed by the needs of now and projecting the needs into the next few years. The needs for now include the fact that we don't have an ongoing funding source for our capital needs of first responders. Tucson voters voted a 5-year sales tax to provide a lot of that need under Prop 101. Those funds have been expended, except for the funds still building the Southeast TPD Annex breaking ground in a week or two.
Couple weeks.
So some of those projects are still being completed, but the apparatus has been bought. It's on the streets now. The fire engines are on the streets now. And the bulk of the Tucson Fire and Tucson Police budgets go to personnel right now. So there's not really a dedicated funding source for that. So those needs will continue to compound. The need for expansions of personnel is meeting the need of now, where we're predominantly responsive. We try to be preventive, and we're doing things. Some of these investments will help us become more preventive of incidents in the future, but right now we're pretty reactive, and we want to make sure we're reacting appropriately. However, the investments in neighborhood community resilience and affordable housing and shelter will help move us as a community from reactive to proactive. They will house more people over time, and this is a tremendous increase. Even though some might argue that that percentage of the pie for affordable housing is small, the magnitude of that investment, the magnitude of that from a city investing is tremendously higher than what we do today. The vast majority of our housing funding comes from the federal government. We have some general fund that goes to this. This would significantly increase that. That increases the pace of getting housing built. And the other thing to understand is the city's contribution does not need to be, nor should it be, paying the full cost of building housing. In fact, our role is as a facilitator, a regulator, and as a catalyst by providing, and especially I'll hone in on the gap financing piece. We don't need to spend $18 million to build 63 new units of housing. Our most recent project, Milagro on Oracle, had $500,000 of City of Tucson gap financing and attracted $18.1 million of private financing, tax credits, and other programs to build those 63 units. It's not a good use of Tucson taxpayer dollars to spend $18 million to build that project. Much better use to use $500,000, $1 million, and get those units built. Because the thing about gap financing is the gap exists because the deal almost makes sense. It's this close. And right now what we say is this close means it doesn't get built. This funding would mean they get built. And so it leverages, and that's an 18 million to $500,000 ratio of leveraged dollars. When you have $2 million a year, it would quadruple that type of impact. And the neighborhood community resilience, when we were talking about Viva and we were talking about moving the east side location into maintenance mode means doing a couple things, meaning it is CSOs, no longer sworn officers, and it's social workers, and it's engagement with the neighborhood association or the apartment complex association, and it's also doing some direct physical investments, building a green space, putting up a basketball hoop, creating a community gathering location, or convening health fairs. All of those things are what neighborhood and community resilience does to transform those locations once we've gotten the violent crime reduced. So that's my response to that is this is the chemistry of now, meeting the needs of now, but also what would drive us toward a different chemistry of need in the future.
I will just add that the unsheltered homelessness challenge is, I know I've only been at this for 5 years, but this is the most complex issue that has come across our table because we have so many different factors and reasons and stories for why folks are in the position that they're in. I appreciate the city manager sharing how the city's role is with respect to building affordable housing. As he said, we are a conduit. We are facilitating dollars coming in from other sources. And that is what we've continued to do in prioritizing the gap funding. I don't know if folks are aware, but too, in that case, that $500,000, those are loans as well. So those funds do come back to the city. We're not giving that money away. So I'm hopeful that the configuration that we have here will enable us to have enough to continue to facilitate the development of affordable housing. I know it's tough. I know for our social workers, it feels like we get somebody housed and then there's 2 more folks that are in need, and it is difficult work, but I am confident that the way that we have structured our work and facilitated development will continue with the composition that we have in front of us.
Okay. Well, the next is really 2 questions, but they're so related that I'm going to ask them together. Please explain other possible funding sources and how much of the city budget does this proposition represent?
I'm going to take that one for starters, too.
Sure. So the percentage of the city budget that this represents is relatively small. But that's a little bit deceiving, and I'll explain why. So the total city budget is $2.4 billion a year, and you'll hear some of the business groups and others say, surely with $2.4 billion a year, you can find $80 million a year. You should be able to bring on Elon Musk and his team, and you could shake that out. That was a cheap shot, but I'll
Please
take it. The reality is the vast majority of that $2.4 billion a year is dedicated to specific things, legally, ethically, or by policy. For example, we own and operate the Tucson Water Utility. That $2.4 billion includes all the money that comes in and out of Tucson Water. I don't think people that are saying you should be able to find money out of $2.4 billion are saying we should charge Tucson Water ratepayers to pay for cops. I don't think they're saying that, but they're implying that we could do that. We run environmental services. We get what's called HERF revenues, Highway User Revenue Funds, that are to go to roads. When you account for, and federal grants for that, voters vote, pardon? The marijuana tax, that does go to public safety. That's about growing to $4 million a year. So you have to slot all of those revenues to the reason and purpose behind them and or the promise to the voter. You pass Prop 411 to do our roads. I'm not going to, nor should I take that money and do police or fire with it. So when you take it all down, you get to $750 million. That's the general fund of the city of Tucson. Within that general fund of $750 million, still a lot of money. Can't you find 10%? 2/3 of it already goes to these things in Prop 414 between police, fire, housing, contributions. So now you got 1/3 of it. Can't you get 80 million out of 1/3? Well, we have a charter responsibility to do parks. I don't think you said, so when you really look at it, we will always look for new efficiencies. We always challenge the way we do business. And if you knew my predecessor, Mr. Mike Ortega, and I worked under him for 9 years before I got this role, you know that he squeezed every last drop out of every tax dollar and rate dollar. And we continue to do that. We will continue to do that. But this $80 million cannot be found within that $2.4 billion. And did that answer both questions? There was the other side of it. I want to make sure I didn't lose.
Well, please explain other possible funding sources.
Okay, so within the housing piece, the vast majority of the funding comes from the federal government. We run a housing authority, so that's the vast majority of the funding. Today it's on, tomorrow it might not be. There was a whole day where our portals were down. We couldn't draw money from the federal government, even though we had contracts that said do it. The funding for neighborhood and community resilience largely comes from the general fund already in the form of some of the programs we've stood up, and some of it is grant funded. And I'm going to take 1 second and define an acronym, talk about it, and then dismiss it. Coming out of the pandemic, the city received CARES dollars and what we called ARPA dollars, America Rescue Plan Act dollars, so federal dollars to replace like lost revenues and other impacts from the pandemic. That ARPA money, Mayor and Council adopted a framework to use that ARPA dollars. And we've done that. We've followed that framework. It's been mobilized to buy things directly. It's built things, and we've built a couple programs. Housing First is one of them. But that was one pot of money that we've been stretching as far as we can. So that's not a renewable source. So really it comes down to the grants that the folks can get from various sources and then the general fund.
And Tim, the secondary property taxes come up. Can you speak a little bit about how that option doesn't exist?
So the secondary property tax, the city has very limited ability and a very small secondary property tax that it can and does levy. And that is used to fund parts of our operation, but primarily at this point, the capacity within that is dedicated to servicing the debt that we take on for our Proposition 407. So we made a promise to voters to do parks improvements. You see them all over town now. And it's an 8-year program, and we're also doing what we call connections, so our greenways, El Paso and Southwest Greenway, other things like that. So that is not funded by a sales tax. That's funded by debt bonding that we do that is serviced by that secondary property tax. So our ability to increase that is limited or non-existent, and we've already done that conversation with the voter to do those investments under 407.
Okay, is this proposition unusual, or is this a common way of funding public safety?
I'll just kind of reframe some of the stuff that Tim talked about. 95% of the police department, 95% of Tucson Fire, and I think Sharon said 96 and a half. She was very specific percent of our 911 communications budgets go toward staffing, personnel, making sure that we're paying folks, they have benefits, our personnel costs. So that leaves a very, very tiny sliver of funding available on an annual basis to add new tech, replace computers. Our 911 call center I'm an IT nerd and I geeked out. There's 6 screens per desk. It's amazing, but all of those things have a life cycle and we have to replace them. And we haven't been able to build fleet replacement into our base budget for our patrol cars. And so from what I have seen, and definitely want Tim to chime in, but without investments like this directly from the community, we don't have a mechanism to continually replace things, equipment, capital investments to the need that our community needs us to be able to do. Did I cover that okay, Tim?
You did, and what I'll add to it is it is unusual to a degree, especially for Tucson, because while Tucson voters have approved things that build stuff or buy stuff, the inclusion of personnel that would be supported by this for that 10-year period is unusual, and it's a different type of ask. And so I'm going to plant a question that I'm going to ask myself is what happens after 10 years? So part of the challenge over the 10 years will be to build capacity in the general fund to absorb those personnel items, which is about a third of this. So it's not an $80 million cliff in year 11. It's like a $25 million a year cliff in $25 million a year cliff in year 11. And we have 10 years to kind of sort that out and create that capacity. And then what did that state flat tax do to us? We never intend to create a program we can't sustain. And then you're predicting what your new future revenues are, and then the legislature makes a change that fundamentally takes a different path. So we're losing $40 million a year of revenue that we had counted on. Now we've absorbed that, we've figured that out, we haven't had to cut back services because we're lean, efficient, and we figure it out. But it's a real impact. That took away our capacity to take on a Housing First when those grants run out, or to continue to fund some of the personnel, some of the equipment of police and fire, because it's not like these needs didn't exist. They were met for a period of time through Prop 101. And then Mayor and Council did build a $178 million general fund balance that was then what became our investment plan. So for this 5 years we're in right now, we're like in year 3 of 5. We've spent $90 million dedicated to things like police cars, motor vehicle, the motorbikes. What do you call them? The motor cops.
Yeah.
Traffic cops, their motorcycles, the paramedic ambulances, turnouts and other things. So normally you would fund this out of the general fund. We don't have the capacity in the general fund, but we've taken whatever capacity we had and created an investment plan to do at least 5 years of that. So it is unusual, but it is also a pretty direct ask of the voter. We're bringing humor now? I'm ready.
Well, no, it isn't humorous, it's sort of saying. What does affordable housing mean? Because nothing is affordable. Is the city of Tucson going to buy up all of the real estate and divide it up?
The answer to the second part is no, but we have bought a fair number of things. One of our programs is we bought a few of the, shall we say, less swanky hotels along Oracle. We've bought distressed hotel properties, we've remodeled them, and then we use those for either shelter services or transitional housing. The goal is not to shelter people, the goal is to house people. And you got to meet them where they're at. Some people are ready, hey, all I need is a little bit of help. I need a first and last month's rent and I'm in. And some people need a lot of mental health support, substance use support, wraparound services to stabilize and move forward. So we've done one-time purchases with Amazon Hotel, Nights Inn, the old No-Tell Motel. If you know it, don't admit it. And we've transformed them into something else. So that is one type of affordable housing. But increasing housing stock across the spectrum of housing helps housing affordability for everybody. So even building market rate housing increases the inventory. When you increase the inventory, you decrease prices, or at least keep prices from rising as fast. And so there's things we do even outside of this ask, or the housing department, if you will. Our planning and development services department works on things that make our zoning more friendly toward building housing, to reviewing housing permits faster. These are things we can measure as well that show trying to be a better business partner to people building the housing is also critical and important. And we're not asking for any help there. We're just saying we're doing that, and we're going to keep doing that. But this is the area where we need some help.
I'll just add too, we recently got some updated numbers, and our city needs about 35,000 and some change additional housing units built over the next 10 years to keep up with the demand that we have to continue to create what little bit of affordability it is out there to try to purchase a home. And so, as the city manager said, making sure that we're streamlining our processes, we're reducing barriers to building housing wherever we can to speed up the process and keep the cost as low as possible so that those increases don't get passed on to the people purchasing homes is definitely the area that we have the opportunity to create the fertile grounds for the business community, the development community to bring these units online so that we can have, like you said, Tim, affordable housing at all different levels of income.
And I just did math in public, which is a mistake. But that, when you say that number of housing units needed, if the city were to do that, that's over $10 billion. We're not going to go to Tucsonans and say, we need $10 billion. But with gap financing, other strategies, and the private sector meeting us 20 to 1, you can get there.
Okay, it feels like wealthy areas get paving and police response first. My neighborhood's roads are bad and police response is slow. Will this proposition change that?
I can cover the police portion of that. So speaking reference the proposition, it would hire 40 police officers and then roughly about 60 CSOs and a combination within that of CSOs and PSIs over the course of that 10-year period of time. Using the east side as an example, this is the largest patrol division in the city. My officers can respond to calls at the QT at River and Craycroft and Andrada High School at Andrada and Houghton and still be in the same patrol division operating out of the station at Golf Links and Harrison. It's an enormous chunk of real estate. Our west boundary is Craycroft, and then everything else within the city limits falls into that place. We also have the lowest staff station of all of the 4 police stations. For the neighborhood that you're living in, I apologize that it seems to be a slow response. But yes, this proposition would hire more boots on the ground to address the issues that you have.
What I'll add to it, because you asked about roads as well, and I'll add to it is it's great to build a new Southeast Tucson police annex. Got to have some folks to go there and work out of it, and right now that would just be drawing police resources from other stations right now to staff that. This would help make sure that, although the implied promise of building a police station is there to have police there and fire the same way. As far as roads go, so unless you have a privately owned road, that's your private road. But outside of that, and some HOAs, maintain their own roads. But Prop 411 said every neighborhood street in Tucson. That is what that means. And we've done 25% of them so far. And the other 70, the next, so we did what we called an initial phase of, I think it was about 50 or 60 neighborhoods. And then we had a phase 1, like a rolling 3-year phase 1. We're in the middle of phase 1 and working at schedule. Phase 2 is being developed right now with the independent oversight committee that I talked about. And then phase 3 will be the last part of that. We're on track with that, and every neighborhood road will be improved. So in the last week, Menlo Park was just done, Sam Hughes was done not too long ago. Everywhere you go, you'll see the neighborhood roads getting done. Then we have 2 other types of roads, collector streets, Pima, Tucson, Bilby. they're big roads, but not the big roads. As part of Prop 411, the promise to the voter is for 5 years, we would fund $15 million a year of collector streets improvements. That is funded out of the general fund investment plan, that savings account we had, and a dedication of our HERF revenues. So Stell is under construction right now. We just finished a large stretch of Tucson Boulevard. Bilby is in design. Are you happy about Tucson Boulevard? So I leave my office, I go to the Canes on Speedway, I go to Himmel Park, and I sit there and I eat my Canes, and I come back out, and I turn right off of, I think it's First, onto Tucson Boulevard, and I no longer have to have my Tacoma. I can actually just glide on out. So, but that's the collector streets, and we're going to have to come up with, what's the next 5 years look like, but we're right in the middle of that. The biggest ones are the, Broadway, Speedway, 22nd. Those are called arterials. Largely the arterials right now are being met through the RTA. We're on the tail end of some of the RTA projects. Grant's got a lot of construction going on when we're finishing downtown links. It's not a 100% solution. You're going to be faced with another choice in the near future about the extension of RTA, and called RTA Next. And this isn't about RTA Next, so if I go off topic, I just want to finish the road question by saying the city of Tucson has advocated that RTA Next, if approved, includes arterial reconstruction dollars. So RTA 1, it did things like the streetcar. It built some new stuff. It widened a lot of streets. Tucson isn't that city that needs a lot of widening anymore. What we need is to take care of the stuff that's just recently been built. So like Broadway's already redone. We don't need to redo Broadway again. We need to maintain it. And we're still fighting tooth and nail with our neighbors around the region to recognize the value of having arterial reconstruction in it. So that's the answer to the roads. Your neighborhood streets are getting done real quick, if not already. The collectors, we're working on them, and then the arterials still need a solution.
Tim, can they see when their street is projected, like by phase or anything yet for 411?
So if you're in initial or phase 1, you can see that. The map's the whole map of the city, right? Phase 2, so what's left is phases 2 and 3, and phase 2 and 3, you don't know yet whether you're in 2 or 3. When we define 2 and the council approves it, I notified our directors, you've also then defined 3 because everything else is in 3. So I would say not at the moment unless you're in phase 1. If you're in phase 1, you probably already know because it's already either done or about to be done. Within the next year, you'll probably know where you fit in the rest of that time frame. And I will say, if you have a specific question, feel free to reach out through the organizers, and just we can tell you what we know about your specific neighborhood.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, but I want to thank you for joining us today. I want to thank the audience for being good listeners and asking appropriate questions. And I thank our speakers for taking time out of their busy schedules to enlighten us on 414. Thank you.
Thank you very much.